Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live. I am your host, Viz, and tonight we have special guest, writer director Addison Heimann with us. Addison's new movie is called Hypochondriac, and it's coming out to theaters this Friday, July 29th, and then wide to video on demand and digital on August 4th. Addison, thank you so much for being our guest. How you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm a couple high noons in. That's like a different seltzer water than White Claw because I figured we're doing a talk show. I want to be like a little loosey goosey or whatever. And I don't need
I
to say that. Whatever. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
I love the background from the movie, by the way. That's
Thank
awesome.
you. Yes, it's our poster. Yes. Oh, it's actually. Oh, it's yep. It's in reverse. I see. But that was my fault. I should have
No,
added.
that's fine.
You know what?
It's okay.
Whatever.
It's okay.
No, the
It's
beautiful
fine. It
thing.
looks
Yeah.
great. The poster's
I'm,
great.
mhm.
I checked out the movie, guys. You're definitely going to want to check this out. It's a movie that you're really going to enjoy. So let's get right into it. Now, Hypochondriac deals with trauma, mental illness, trauma suffered from a child, and its lifelong effects after that. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
what was your inspiration when you sat down to write this screenplay?
You know, sorry, I'm trying to find good light because I'm just like whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, I think we're good. This is the best light here. Okay, yeah, I mean, well, ultimately the movie's about my mental breakdown, and basically what happened was I lost full functioning of my arms for 6 months after an injury at work, and I was visiting Dr. Google, and Dr. Google told me I was dying of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and I of course believed Google instead of my friends and my family and even my aunt who was a doctor. And while that was happening, my mother, who's bipolar, was leaving me messages telling me not to trust my friends. So that confluence of events caused me to crack. And that is what basically inspired the film. I wrote an early draft during the middle of my mental breakdown as kind of like a therapy draft is basically the best way to call it. But ultimately, I decided more on an emotional retelling of it because all my friends were like, just because it happened doesn't mean it's interesting. And I was like, oh, okay, so you hate me? And they're like, no, Addison, come on, shut up. And I was like, but you hate me? And they're like, no, we don't. Well, maybe a little because you're being annoying now. Um, and then I, um, and then I ended up basically fighting it, but then I ended up writing a movie basically about inherited trauma with my mother, and that ended up turning into the script in which the movie was filmed for because scripts turn into movies. That's how things work.
Now, you mentioned the Dr. Google thing. Now, that is something that everyone can relate to. If you feel sick, you're having symptoms, everyone's going to turn to the internet. In the film, you make it a point to highlight the doctors telling the main character, Will, to stop doing that. It can be
Right,
helpful to some degree if,
right.
something's, you have a very specific questions. But when you go to Google to start looking up symptoms, that's where
Yeah.
people get into trouble.
Oh yeah,
Why
I know.
and how important was it for you to highlight that aspect?
Well, and that's the thing is, the worst part of Google is that once you get it in your mind that you have something, it'll start just suggesting and catering to you. I actually tested this theory like later on in my breakdown where I was like, I went from ALS to thinking I had multiple sclerosis, and I used my phone and I typed in symptoms, and it was like, you have multiple sclerosis. And then I went on my dad's phone and I Googled, and it had nothing. So I was like, Google was literally telling me or trying to convince me that I had ALS. So I was just like, an MS. I was just like, you know what? I I got tricked, or I don't know. Just no one Googled their symptoms. If anything, if I could tell you anything, if you're having symptoms, if you're feeling problems, don't Google them. It's not helpful. It's not helpful at all.
I absolutely agree. I've been right there with you as well. Where
Yeah.
Google is useful and any search on the internet is useful
Hmm.
is if you have a very specific question. Okay,
Right.
then you can look up an answer. But when it comes to
Yes.
symptoms, no, that's just a bad idea. You're going to end up freaking yourself out. And, we
Right.
see the main character in the movie Will go down that road. Now, this is your directorial debut. Congratulations for
Oh,
that. Uh,
hello.
Oh, you kind of froze on the screen. Are you still there,
Oh,
Addison?
you disappeared. Hold on. We're
Oh,
gonna do this.
yeah.
Hmm.
Can you hear me? There you are. There you
Oh,
are. We got you back. We
yes,
got
I
you
can.
back.
Here we're gonna do. We're gonna do. I'm gonna try to. I think this is better Wi-Fi right here. So I'm gonna do a little sitting on the floor. How's this sound?
No,
Does
it
it look
looks
okay?
great. Yeah, it looked
Great.
great. Looked great. So, like I said, this was your directorial debut.
Yes.
What was it like taking the reins behind the camera on a screenplay you wrote for the first time?
I was primarily a writer director. I mean, sorry, excuse me, writer producer before, and I started as an actor. So I like went through so many different steps before I ended up actually directing. When I was acting, I was like, oh, okay, you audition, do these things, and as a writer, everybody was like, oh, Addison, your plays sound like screenplays, which is an insult in the theater world. So I transitioned to film, and this was kind of my first foray into horror because my mental breakdown felt horrific to me. So that's kind of what I felt like. And when it got down to actually directing it, it was just like I was like, you know what? I see this. I know this. This happened to me. I can see it in my brain. And then because of the pandemic, we pushed a year and a half, so I watched 400 horror movies in
Hmm.
the span of like a year. So like that was my film school on top of all the other things that I did, and that basically made also, the beautiful thing is I don't ascribe to the auteur theory. Movies aren't made in like a in solitude. They're made with collaboration.
Uh huh.
So the beautiful thing about directing, especially what my producer said, they're like, Addison, you need to be nice, and you need to make decisions. And I was like, okay, cool. And then when I got on set, everyone's like, Addison, it's so great. You're good. You're nice, and you make decisions. And I was like, isn't that the bare minimum? And they're like, you'd be surprised. And I was like, cool, 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 cool. But here's the thing. You have an expert in every field, right? You have your cinematographer, you have your sound mixer, you have your production designer, you have your scripty, you have all these people on set, especially your producers who are like the most important people, and you're all making the movie together.
Hmm.
So the best thing that I did to describe Hypochondriac is because it's about my mental breakdown and you're never quite sure what's going on if something's real and what's not real. I used this thing from this weird Nintendo GameCube game called um, Eternal Darkness,
Hmm.
where there's these characters that when they get attacked or hurt, their insanity meter goes up. So I use this vocabulary of using the insanity meter. There are two going on, right? There's one in which I want the audience to know or think is like real or not real. And there's also what's actually real and not real. And those two are constantly shifting and in flux. So every scene I would tell that to the whole crew, and then I would come on set and it would be designed as if it's exactly what I said to do. So that kind of framing reference helped everybody like basically get all on the same page. And then that ultimately led to I think a really fantastic collaboration.
And that leads me to my next question because you just brought up a very interesting point.
Hmm.
As a viewer,
Right.
where we want to know as we're watching this film, because Will's mom does have a mental illness. Okay,
Right.
so we're trying to figure out as the movie progresses, is what he's going through a product of his childhood trauma, or is it a mental illness? Is
Right.
that what you wanted the audience to ponder?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, he's definitely going through his mental illness. He's in battle with his brain, and that ultimately is the crux of the movie. There's no villain. It's not the mom. It's not the dad. It's not the wolf. It's not his shitty boss. It's his brain. So you're basically with him the entire time. You're with him, and you are watching him go through this and battling his brain,
Yeah,
and that is, I think, more horrific in a way
yeah,
because like at any moment, I mean that's what happens in the middle of the movie. He reaches into a kiln because he thinks there's a child inside, and ultimately it burns his arms to the point where he has to be in bandages for the rest of the movie.
hmm,
And that we don't know exactly why or how that happened, but we saw the repercussions of his brain tricking him into thinking that there are things there that are not there.
yeah. What I loved is when he's having these hallucinations and of the wolf that we see. It's not a like you could have gone either way with this. You could have shown us an actual wolf, whether it's CGI or whatever, but you
Right.
made it very noticeable and for us to know that this is not actually a wolf. It's sort of
Right.
a grown person, sometimes a child, wearing a
Right.
costume.
Right.
Did you battle within your own mind on how you wanted to portray that, or
Yeah.
was it easy
Yeah.
right off the bat?
Well, it's funny. I mean, there's this little unknown indie movie that no one's ever seen, made in 2001, called Donnie Darko. And okay, let's pretend a joke. Obviously, everybody knows Donnie Darko. It's one of my favorite movies, and I think one of the reasons I really love that movie is because you have like sparkle motion. You have you have the Gyllenhaals arguing about how one sucks a fuck. You have all these ridiculous things, and then you also have Donnie sitting on the bed with his mom, being like, "How does it feel to have a wacko for a son?" And she says, "It feels wonderful," and that's in the same movie.
Yeah.
So when I was writing the movie, the original draft of the script was actually his best friend dies of a disease right in front of him while wearing a wolf costume in Halloween.
Okay.
But when I ultimately had the courage to write about my mother and my relationship, I liked the wolf costume, but it actually fit quite well because ultimately that's what it is. It's like this entity that is both human and animal, both tamed and not tamed. And I thought a wolf was a great representation of that, especially not like an actual wolf, but a human wolf, because
Yeah.
it's ultimately just like it's scary, but it's not scary, and it's also the idea that's like it's not a monster. It's like No Face is Spirited Away. It's
Hmm.
like he gets infected by the world that surrounds him. It's not because of him. So every time Will pushes his mental illness and his anxieties and his trauma with his mother away, the wolf gets scarier and scarier and more aggressive and more violent. And that ultimately, that thread, until he finally is like, oh shit, I acknowledge my mental illness and I acknowledge my mother. Is he able to overcome everything?
Absolutely. Now, Will is played by Zach Villa, and
Yeah.
Vila, and he does a great job portraying
Yeah.
Will. What was it that you saw in Zach that you're like, you know what, that's my Will?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, he went to Juilliard, so that was a plus. But also, it's he was the last person who auditioned, and I'd heard of him, and I was like, okay, and I'd seen American Horror Story in 1984, and I was like, I was watching all these tapes, and I sent them two scenes. I sent them a scene in which he was panicking, and I sent him a scene in which he was getting somebody else out of a panic attack. And ultimately, most of the actors could do one or the other. And then it was the last tape of of the submissions. It was like 3 or 4 days late, and Michelle, my casting director, was like, "Okay, I have one more for you." And then I saw Zach's tape, and the amount of specificity he brought to being both a caretaker and a caregiver
Hmm.
was it just filled me with empathy. He was filled with pathos, and by the time I met him and I got to discuss his own um troubles with mental health with him and his family, I was like, this is the guy. I mean, this is, and then annoyingly he kind of became me in the movie, which is, everybody on set, they're like, "Oh yeah, you have the same haircut, you have the same beard, you guys are twins," and I'm like, and we're done with this joke. But it's not like he was doing like a caricature or anything. He just found a really cool way to combine my character, himself, and the character in the script to create this hybrid of somebody that was just like really engaging to watch. And it was a joy working with him because we had this shorthand before we even stepped on set because I cast him more than a year out. Because of the pandemic, we had to push back several times, and so by the time we got on set, we were just like, you know, peanut butter and jelly. Is that the metaphor?
Yeah, sure. So you guys had a lot
Yeah,
of conversations about
yeah.
what you went through and
Mhm.
what you wanted him to portray. So by the time you guys did come on set, you were ready to go.
Yeah, yeah, and that was great. I couldn't ask for a better partner in crime when it comes to acting. And he led the set, in terms of the acting side, and he went through a lot of stuff. I asked him to do a lot of things, and he did them with bravado and bravery. And I'm,
Absolutely.
forever grateful he agreed to do the project.
Now, another important character in this movie is Will's boyfriend, partner,
Hmm.
Luke.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
There's a very explicit scene between
Yep.
Will and Luke.
Hmm.
Was that meant to give us a deeper look into Will's mind or his relationship with Luke?
Yes. You're talking about the sex scene, I'm
Yes.
assuming?
Yes.
Yes. So, yeah. So I wanted to do that for several reasons. One, um, gay sex is very rarely portrayed realistically in film.
Hmm.
And I wanted to write a scene and film a scene that portrayed that as honestly as possible. Another reason is because that is Will at his lowest moment. And so when I talked to Zach, and my reason behind wanting to do, because I don't want to just do sex scenes to do sex scenes, like there has to be story involved. And I think
Hmm.
ultimately that moment, it's like Halle Berry in Monster when she's turning to Billy Bob Thornton. She just wants to forget. But
Yeah.
that's just another, it's just another thing he's doing to avoid dealing with his own problems. So rather than being like, I need help or I need to do this, he's like, I want to be fucked. And it's just like that ultimately is also wrong, which is why that scene goes sideways because it's the wrong thing. He's trying to solve the wrong issues.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's why I wanted to include that.
Who do you think is, I hate to use the word blame, but in that scene, it going
Yeah.
sideways, whose is
Yeah.
it more responsible? Is it Will or Luke?
I would say I mean, will in a sense, but only in the sense that it's his brain.
Yeah.
So the thing about mental illness and specifically bipolar disorder is that there's two versions of the self. There's Jekyll and then there's Hyde.
Hmm.
And when usually that's when you're lucid or you're manic. And with my mother, when she was Jekyll, she was friendly, she was kind, she was a loving person. But when she was Hyde, she was emotionally abusive and hard to be around and alienating.
Hmm.
So that scene specifically is about the struggle within the self, between the struggle of Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah.
So that's why you see at the end, as things start to mirror themselves, the split screening, the like the lens baby, the blurring and all that kind of stuff. It's his inner Hyde coming out, trying to destroy the situation while Jekyll is vulnerable and
Hmm.
quiet and suffering. And that's kind of how I view that scene.
Tell us about Luke and Will's mom relationship. That seems really odd, out of place, but
Yeah,
we don't actually get to see them really
right.
communicating on the screen, but we know they do communicate, and
Yeah,
that makes Will paranoid. Tell us about
right.
that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately that came from my real life, and I think, I think it's hard, right? Because my mother was telling me not to trust my friends, and she was reaching out to my friends and finding their emails online, and so I think in that moment, like the idea of Luke being like talking to his mom is like a strong, it's like an overstatement because it's
Hmm.
just like it's more to the thing of like I know your mom's alive. She's been emailing me crazy things, and that's kind of the extent of the conversation.
Hmm.
Everything else is kind of within of a form of Will's psychiatric self, his mind. He's making up all of these things rather than actually admitting to himself that he needs help. And so that's ultimately what the movie is. Like, it's not. It's funny because, and I really actually like these questions because you're coming from the point, and you're coming from the perspective, I think, almost as if everything in this movie happened.
Hmm.
And in my view, a lot of it, or at least it's like a lot of it didn't, because it's Will's exaggerative mind
Yeah.
that's viewing this thing through that perspective. And at the beginning, we start as realistic as possible. And Will always has something to grasp onto, whether it's his coworker, whether it's his boyfriend, and in the later half of the movie, maybe his dad or a doctor. But by that point in the movie, he's so far gone that these thoughts and these imagined conversations ultimately may or may not be real because he is not necessarily within his own mind and his own lucidity. He's off into a world that isn't necessarily real.
I'm glad you sort of said about his mom being alive because throughout the majority of the film, as we see his mom calling him, we're left wondering, is this actually happening? Because
Totally, yeah.
we're not going to spoil the beginning of the movie, but we're sort of
Right.
left to think that, that might not be the case. But you're wondering, and we're not going to let people know what actually happens. But it's going to spoil it, but it's
Right.
like, what is, it goes back to the point you just made. What is real? What is
Right.
not real? And it just has you
Yeah.
questioning. Now,
Right.
my takeaway is that, and I think you sort of touched on this as well, that Will
Hmm.
is hoping that this is something physical as opposed to it being something mental. He even
Exactly.
says, let it be ALS, let it be
Hmm.
multiple sclerosis.
Right.
He is just terrified of it,
Right.
of him becoming his mom,
Right.
in a sense. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's like I think the crux of the movie and the theme of the movie, and also his fatal flaw, because and that's what happened to me too. I was so afraid that I was becoming my mother that I disintegrated into a dark corner and a dark place of my mind because I was refusing to ask for help. And I was basically, and like, Hypochondriac, the title is kind of a bait and switch because that's what he's doing. He's trying to solve this idea of, of, of what's happening to him, whether
Mm-hmm.
he's dying of ALS, whether he's dying of MS, whether he has some other neuromuscular degenerative disease. But ultimately, what he's doing is he's trying to solve the symptoms of the underlying disease that is his generational trauma with his mother, and
Mm-hmm.
that's ultimately his fatal flaw. He's trying to solve everything, but dealing with his mother, and
Yes.
that's why he goes down the rabbit hole, and that's why he spirals because of the fact that he just doesn't admit what's staring at him in the face.
Absolutely. Now, before we go, I have one final question. And
Sure.
you make a big reference in the movie to the 1990 movie Ghost. I mean, you don't try to tiptoe around it.
No, no, no.
It's right there. Demi Moore in Ghost was a pottery maker. Will is a
Mm,
pottery maker.
yep.
Uh, what led you to do that? That's just the simplest way I can frame it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, uh, I can't. I couldn't do a pottery scene without homaging a ghost scene. Of course, we didn't get the rights to Unchained Melody, but I think my composer did a good job of creating its psychosis. But that's an example of being in the maximum amount of psychosis in both insanity meters. It's both a 10 on you're supposed to know this is not real, and it's a 10 that it isn't real in this like imagined world. But it is a representation of his descent into madness after
Yeah,
just witnessing arguably the only real thing in the movie that's concrete, which is the found footage sequence where he finds scenes of him as a child with his mother and his father. And
yeah,
at that point, he's so far gone and so down the rabbit hole that all he could do is sit with his ghost, sit with his trauma, and weirdly sensually make pottery with it and be covered in blood because it's like that sense of complete and utter mania where
yeah,
it's like the craziest moment of his life and in the discovery of all these scenes in which he's basically suppressed his whole life, or maybe not even suppressed, but that thing that we do is we compartmentalize trauma to
yeah,
the point where like we can exist because sometimes we just have to do it. Our brains are very good at hiding hard things. It's not like we don't remember them, but we're not immediately thrown back into those moments until certain times. And I think that found footage shape brings him back there to the point that there's just a pure moment of like fucking wild insanity, culminating him and ending up in the ER trying to get an MRI because
yeah.
something is wrong.
Absolutely. Thank you. The movie again is called Hypochondriac. Like I said at the beginning of the show, it's coming out to select theaters this Friday, July 29th, and then wide on digital and on demand August 4th. Check it
Yep.
out. I would love to talk about the ending, but we can't. It's going to give away too many
Yep.
spoilers.
Yep. 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 But
Yeah,
watch it.
but definitely watch it. You're going to really enjoy this film. It's going to take you on a roller coaster. I want to thank our guest, who is the writer director of Hypochondriac, Addison Heimann. Addison, do you have any final thoughts you want to share before we go?
If you get a chance to be if you in the cities in which we're releasing, I advise you go to the theater. The sound design is quite good, but I understand the times we're in. If you like it, tell your friends. If you don't like it, please don't tell me. Um, I'm very, very fragile. No, I'm kidding. It's yours. Do whatever you need to, whatever you need to do. But thank you so much for watching. And if you want, you can find me on the Instagram at AddieBear5, and you can follow the movies Instagram handle at hypochondriac.film.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to our guest, Addison Heimann. I want to thank our audience, those who have tuned in live and those who will be watching this later on. Thank you so much. Again, the name of the movie is called Hypochondriac, July 29th in theaters, August 4th on demand. Till next time, guys, on behalf of Addison and myself, stay safe and stay walking. Good night, everyone.
Cheers.